Good morning. I've been told I need to be near the mic. I'm hoping I'm near enough to it. So I thought I'd just start off by telling you a bit more about my career so far and what's happened since I left here. So like Mike said, it's about 4 or 5 years since I was sat exactly where you are now. And I remember the one thing I always wanted to know was, how do people get to where they'd got to? And more importantly, how on earth do you get paid to be a journalist, which I think is the best job in the world. So how do you get paid to have the most brilliant experiences as well? So for me, it all started off, I knew I wanted to be a journalist, but I didn't study journalism originally. I did history and English, but I was involved in student media and that kind of thing, newspaper, radio, magazine. And I did a work placement at the Sheffield Star newspaper. And it wasn't what I expected, and I felt really disappointed. Everyone was lovely, but there was just something missing. And that's when I thought, do I actually want to be a journalist? Is this what I want to do? And at the same time, I found community radio, which, if you've heard about it, sometimes the show's done by volunteers. And that's where I fell in love with radio. I suddenly realised I want to do broadcasting. It's broadcast journalism I want to do. So when I finished at university doing my undergrad, I set up loads of work placements, lots of free work, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. I went to Sky News, I went to CBBC, Calendar, Look North. I did my stint, I suppose. And the one thing that kept coming up was, you need to have a qualification in journalism. You need to be trusted in a newsroom. You need to know media law. That was the big thing. And that's why it's so great that you're all sat here doing a journalism course, because you're going to have that foundation. So you're already a step ahead from other people when you're going for jobs and applying for different positions. And from there, I realised that I had to go back to university. So I came here and did the postgrad course. It was recommended by lots of people, and I thought, I'll go back and I'll do that. And it was a great year. I really enjoyed it. And you will be working with some of the same staff that I did. And it was just a really great experience. And it really sets you up for getting work afterwards. And at the end of the course, we did placement. So once again, I was working for free, and that elusive paid job was kind of getting nearer, but still quite far away at the time. So I did a lot of free work, and at Hallam FM, where I now work, and I now get paid to work, which is nice. So I did all those placements, and it was after that, which you're then kind of in the big wide world of, how do I go about freelancing? How do I position myself? How do I convince news editors that they can invest in me, I suppose, to be part of their news team? So you really need to know, what are my strengths and how am I going to sell them to editors when I'm sending out a CV? You're not the only person that's going to be sending a CV out, so they'll be receiving lots of emails, lots of CVs, lots of demos. You need to make sure that you shine. So really know your strengths and not be afraid to sell them as well. Don't be afraid to sell yourself. And I'm sure Mike will tell you as well, I'm rubbish at replying to emails, because all journalists are. So they won't reply to your emails, and if they don't be afraid to email them again, give them a ring, because you really need to make the effort to put yourself out there. And I'll be quite honest, I struggled at first to freelance, because it's quite a daunting thing to go from doing work and not being paid for it to then convince people, well, actually, I can do that job and you can pay me for it. I deserve to be paid just as the other people in your team do. So it's about having that self-worth as well and not being afraid to take those opportunities. So that's probably my one bit of advice for when you're freelancing afterwards. Obviously, you're looking for permanent jobs as well. Freelancing doesn't work for everybody. But that's how I got my first permanent job. I was freelancing at a very small radio station called High Peak Radio, and a job came up. So I guess I was in the right place at the right time. And you'll probably hear this week quite a lot, that sometimes luck comes into this quite a lot. It's about knowing the right people, being in the right place at the right time, and being prepared to take those opportunities. You need to be ready when something comes up to say, look, I can do this job, take me on, I'm the right person for it. So that was my first permanent job at High Peak Radio. I stayed there about 18 months and then worked my way up to news editor. So before I was 25, I was news editor for a station, which was a very steep learning curve, really great experience, and it just made me really reevaluate, what is it that I want news to sound like, why are we covering things, why are we covering it in this way, and that's something which you constantly should be doing as a journalist. Why am I doing this, and why am I doing it in this way? And that's something which is invaluable, to be constantly reevaluating what you're doing. And then after a few hairy journeys over the hills in the snow to get to High Peak Radio, a job came up at Hallam FM. I'm from Sheffield originally, so I went for the job and I got it. And it was a reporter role, so I've been at Hallam FM now about 3 years. And for the last year-ish, I've been the chief reporter for Yorkshire, which just means, I suppose, I have a bit more responsibility, but I still get to go out and about, which is what I love. So that's the best thing about the job. And Hallam FM is part of the Bauer Media Group. So if you've not heard about it, it's just sort of the parent company, I suppose, for it. And it also owns Radio Air here in Leeds, if you've heard of Radio Air. and then national brands such as Absolute, Heat, Kerrang, Kiss. So it's a really big company with lots of opportunities in it, and there are other commercial radio stations like companies like Global. So there are opportunities out there in commercial radio. You will hear possibly some negative things maybe about sort of cutbacks and smaller news teams, but there are opportunities out there. If you're good enough and you can prove you're good enough, there are definitely jobs, and it's a really exciting industry to be in. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, really. I hope I didn't bore you, but I remember thinking it was always really good to know how people got to where they did. And the reason I'm here today is because Mike obviously invited me after, I think, probably one of my proudest moments of my career so far, and that was winning a National Journalism Award. And it was for a documentary I produced for Hallam FM about prostitution, so quite a gritty subject, and something which I suppose you can really get your teeth into because there's so much about it. And the piece I'm going to play for you in a bit is about 10 minutes in length. It's a sort of mini documentary bringing together lots of different angles about it. And I'll just put it into context really for you so you can work out how it came into commercial radio. So it was after a week of content on prostitution. So I was producing content for bulletins, which were going out every single day with a different angle. All of it was exclusive and original, so it was a lot of hard work, but it was the most rewarding thing I think I've done for work so far, because it just encompassed so much and speaking to so many different people. So every day there was content and bulletins. There were also shorter packages, which were about 1 minute, 1 minute 10, if I could push my luck and have a bit more time in bulletins. And then that all culminated in this 10-minute piece. And the way it came about was, I suppose with any stories, you want to know, how do you find out about them? How do you find an exclusive story? Where on earth do they come from? And this originally started because I'd seen some minutes from a police community meeting where they'd brought up some priorities from people living there. And one of them was about prostitution. So initially I thought, oh, crikey, this is a bit of a difficult subject, a bit of a hard sell on commercial radio, a family station, but there's possibly some potential here to do something more. And the more I spoke to people, the more I got out in Doncaster, the more I sort of went out into the community and spoke to people living there, the girls, the sex workers themselves. I realised actually there is just so much here that this isn't one day's worth of content. This could be a whole week. This could be something much bigger. And I'd never done anything like this before. So this was a challenge, creating a 10-minute documentary that was just, it was a big challenge to sort of set up and gear towards. But I did it, and it was rumbling along whilst I was doing my day job. So I was going out reporting on breaking news, sort of anything and everything that was happening, and still forward planning and doing all of that at the same time as working on this. So it took a lot of, I suppose this is the not very glamorous side of journalism. I was out at 10 o'clock at night on a street corner. I was out there doing that, and I was out with the police and at weekends, and it took a lot of time, a lot of my own time to do it. But I think it's I think it was worth it, because it was about doing the story justice, and the people I'd spoken to, it was telling their stories in the right way. So that was kind of how it came about. But the story, and you'll hear actually, it changed completely, the news peg. So any story that you're working on, any news story should have a really strong news peg. So originally the story could have been, there are concerns in Doncaster about prostitution. That would be a fine news angle. That's pretty decent. You've got the story, the audio to bring it to life from the people that you've spoken to. But anything that you're going to do, I think, needs to have a really strong news angle. So a lot of that comes from having facts and figures at the heart of it. You can't argue with facts and figures. Well, I suppose you can do, but that's part of the debate, isn't it? It's about having something which you can peg your piece to, your news to. And so this had been rumbling on. I'd been doing all the interviews going out, and I found the original idea. And then I suddenly found some council figures which showed that prostitution had gone up in Doncaster. And I thought, right, this is it. This is the peg. This is what, the strong news angle I've been waiting for. And then I suddenly thought, this hasn't been reported anywhere else, so this could be an exclusive as well. And then it was a case of, right, I need to do this as soon as possible. I don't want anybody else to trump me. After all these months of hard work, I don't want anyone to get in there before me. So I remember I found out the Thursday, Friday about the figures, and on Monday I had to get my first day of content sorted. So it was a quick turnaround that first day, but it's about having the information, getting in there first, but doing it properly, not doing something half-hearted, not making a mess of it, but just getting the stuff out there as soon as you can, but doing it in a really respectful and sensitive way as well. So the other final thing I will say before I play it is, like I said and alluded to earlier, prostitution isn't something which sits well for commercial radio and a family station. That is a hard sell. I remember talking to my editor about it and the content control at the time, and it was a bit kind of like, how do we put this? How do we position this on the station? And for me, I mean, the content didn't go out at family time, so it wasn't on the school run. We didn't put this out. This went out on a late at night on a Sunday. It didn't go out during sort of peak times for little ears listening. But for me, the way that I approached it, and hopefully you'll hear it when you listen, was trying to find ways that our listeners, so the demographic for Hallam FM is, it's a female in her 30s, a mum, family life is really important to her, so it's trying to think, how can I make that mum who's listening to Hallam FM really care about this? Why should they care about, the women who are out at night, the sex workers, why should they care about that? Why should they be bothered about this issue? So initially, when I was talking to people living there was one mum who said to me, outside my front window, she lived in the so-called red light area, she said, outside my front window, I see men, curb crawlers coming and girls picking up punters outside her front window. Can you imagine that, looking outside your front window and seeing that, coming across needles and sort of just evidence of what's happening there? So immediately, mums and dads listening will be thinking, oh, crikey, this is something which I can't imagine that being on my front doorstep. Obviously it is, people know about it, but to see it so clearly in front of you, that's something which people can feel something about and identify with. And then with the sex workers themselves, irrespective of any other issues they might have had in common, a lot of them did have drug addictions, they did have alcohol addictions, but one of the main things as well they all had in common, a lot of them were mums who were saying to me, we come out here because we want to provide for our families, we want our kids to have the best start, we want them to have everything that their friends have. And as a woman listening to that, I'm not a mum myself, but for mums listening to that, that's something which you think can really be engaging and is hopefully a way of making something which could be quite alien, quite a detached subject from their lives. It's making it relevant to them, making it come into their bubble, I suppose, not being too intrusive, but making them think, right, this is why I should care about this, and this is why I'm listening to it. So I'll play it now. Like I say, it's only about 10 minutes, so hopefully it's not too long. You're not going to all sort of doze off or anything. But afterwards, if you've got any questions that you want to ask me about it or about reporting or journalism, I'm always really happy to talk about that. So feel free to fire away. So I'm going to play this now, if it all works. Play.
Prostitution Uncovered, a Hallam FM news special.
This week, Hallam FM exclusively uncovered that there are now more prostitutes on Doncaster streets than this time last year. It's just after 10 at night and I'm stood on Thorne Road. Opposite me, I can see the pavilion and the fields. It's pitch black and looks pretty intimidating. It's a fairly busy main road, but as a woman on my own, this isn't the kind of place I'd choose to be late at night, let alone getting into strangers' cars. But that's exactly what a growing number of women are doing here.
A friend of mine introduced me to this. Basically, by coming out with her and a car stopping and it wasn't for her, they wanted me, and I said no to begin with, and then I thought, well, I seen the money she was coming back with.
Many women are working the streets simply to make ends meet. They need cash to pay their bills or to feed a drink or drug habit. For others, including Sam, it's also about feeding her family.
My son relies on me solely. I don't want to let him down anymore, so when he asks for something or he wants something, I like to be able to provide it. However hard it is, I do it. He don't know I'm out here doing this. He'd be heartbroken if he knew this is what I were doing. But to see that smile on his face means everything to me.
Thorne Road is also where Emma was first paid for sex, aged just 12.
I ran away from home and I met someone and she was out here and I could see how much money she was earning, and I thought, oh, wicked, I've got all that money. I thought, yeah, I'll do that, and earned loads, and ever since then I just carried on.
The rise is being put down to benefit changes and sanctions, the bedroom tax and just the cost of living at the moment. It also means women like Joanne, who've got out, are having to return.
I stopped doing it for a very long time, for years, and then when I started coming back out again, I was shocked how much it had changed, because it were all about Thorne Road. The girls were coming out with their cans in their own and being right loud and abusive, and that's why the neighbours are complaining.
How do you feel when you look back over the last 15 years on here?
It has got a lot of memories up here for me, good and bad memories. This road, my friend died in the subway there. I've lost a couple of friends out here. Rachel, she was killed by a punter. So I have a lot of bad memories, but then I have some good memories because I've met a lot of good girls out here and good friends out here, and I feel sorry for a lot of these girls out here. They've got children to support, and I know people might say, oh yeah, well you should be working, rah, 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 but it's not that easy to get a job when you've got a background like we have.
There are also 3 women sat on a wall checking out cars as they go past, but they're not sex workers. They're here to support those who are.
Evening, Joanne. Sandwich?
Thank you for my sandwich.
I'd like a packet crisps and a sandwich, please.
Many of the women haven't eaten for days, so Michelle, Mary and Kath come out once a week to hand out sandwiches. They'll also give out condoms and rape alarms. Sometimes they even take them to the doctors.
It's amazing, actually, how little they do know about keeping themselves safe sexually. You know, about using condoms, and you think that they'd know all this, but actually they don't.
They're also here to look out for them.
It's terrifying. At the end of the day, you get in that car door shuts, you don't know you're getting back out of that car. You know, it's a gamble. You're gambling with your life, aren't you? You know what I mean? But when you're doing it and you get used to it and you've got money coming in, you get used to that money. So you do it for that reason, but yeah, you're gambling with your life.
What we do is we write the time down when they come, so that if anything happens to any of them, we can then say, well, actually, we saw it at this time, and sometimes we'll write down what they're wearing if it's distinctive, so we can say if the police were to call us and say, did you see so and so out on this night? We could say, yeah, we saw it at 7:30, at 9:30, 10:45. She was wearing this.
And that's because you could be the last person that might see this girl.
We might be the last person that sees that girl alive. They're doing a risky job out here on the streets. The girl we've just spoken to, she was robbed last week by a punter. So we'll then put that onto the Ugly Mugs database, print it off and bring it out to every other girl we bump into, so that the other women do not get in the same car.
Many of the women don't think there's enough support for them. 2 years ago, Street Reach, a dedicated service for sex workers here, was shut to save money. They now rely on the Amber Project.
One week, one of the women said that perhaps we're the only people that ever show her care. To live your life without one person showing that the care or tenderness towards you, that's what it's all about for me. These women are really inspirational women. It sounds silly to say that, but for us, we say it's a privilege to work with and know these women. I think they're so resilient. I don't like what they have to do to survive, but they're surviving. So I've got a lot of respect for these women.
Paul's partner is a working girl. She goes out to pay for their drug addictions. He told me that it's something he finds tough to deal with.
It upsets me. You know what I mean? I don't want to see my woman out here jumping in cars with people, so what? I don't see it and hurt me. Do you know what I mean?
There's a lot of stereotypes, aren't there, around this? There's a lot of stereotypes about the women, but also about the men who use the women. What is your opinion on them?
To me, they're just dirty old perverts.
So what do the women think about the curb crawlers?
Some of them can be nice, and some of them you can feel sorry for because they're out here because the wife's passed away and they don't want to be involved in a relationship with another woman, and some of them you can actually feel sorry for, but then some of them are married with children. And they're the ones that I think to myself, do you know, you're sad, you're a pervert, you know.
And they tell you this, they tell you that they're married.
Yeah, they tell you they're married. They'll show you pictures of the kids and, you know, tell you how old the kids are and talk about how they don't get enough sex with their wives, or the wives won't do that anymore, and that's why they come out here. But I think to myself, well, it's your wife, you know, you signed up for life, you should be happy with what you've got and just deal with it. You should have known one day, 20 years, 15 years down the line, it weren't going to be as good as what it used to be, but that's men for you, isn't it, my love?
A Hallam FM news special. Prostitution uncovered.
People living here say it's a nightmare. Not just the women on the corners and the men driving around, but finding used condoms and needles. After seeing men picking up women outside her front window, Bernie Aston took things into her own hands.
Basically, I started Neighbourhood Watch because I wasn't going to put up with it. Because my friends in London who were police said, take car numbers, take photographs, and the punters should go away. If there's no punters around, the girls will go away. Unfortunately, not a lot of people, residents, are doing anything about it now up on Thorne Road because I think they've just given up. What do you do? If the police aren't doing anything about it, what can you do?
If you want to tackle a problem of prostitution, it's about looking at the demand and then following that up with support for the women that are supplying that, so that they are getting what they need in order to make the lifestyle choices that so many of them want to make.
That's Louise Richer, who runs the Change course. It's especially designed for men who are caught curb crawling, and it's a bit like the speed awareness one. They pay to do it to avoid going to court. So far, over 15 men have done it in Doncaster.
The percentage is so small of men who are rearrested in the red light area having completed the Change course, and if you compare that to the numbers of men who go back after just having been cautioned, you can see the positive impact that the course has, really.
Other ways of getting women off the streets are being trialled too. Recently, and for the first time in Doncaster, new powers in court are being used. Instead of giving a prostitute a fine, which she then might have to go back out to pay off, they have to go to drop-in sessions with outreach workers. The women have also asked for self-defence sessions, which are just about to start. I met up with this sex worker who didn't want to be named. She says that no matter what happens out there, some women have no choice but to carry on.
It's horrible. It's horrible. It's even worse when something bad happens to you and you're like stuck in the middle of nowhere, been attacked, left bleeding, and there's nobody there, and people just pass you and don't even care. It's not a very nice world at all to be in.
Has that ever happened to you then, that you've been attacked?
Yeah, I've been kidnapped and I've been attacked and raped and left in the middle of nowhere. It's happened more than once to a lot of girls. But like, as I say, they've got no other means of paying the way, so they go back and they have to just deal with it.
Although residents don't feel like the police are doing anything, officers insist that they are. In fact, over the last few months, they've seen the number of incidents go down. So I've been out with them on one of their patrols to see exactly what they do.
Thorn Road, isn't it, Jones? Yours automatically not working. And I'm just sick of it.
I think we've been out sort of less than 10 minutes and you found a woman who's breached her ASBO. She's obviously back here, so it hasn't stopped her already. Do you think any further action will stop her coming out again?
If you breach an ASBO, a magistrate can give you a custodial sentence, whereas for prostitution, there isn't a custodial sentence. She's only been on it for 2 days. So the fact that she's breached it within 2 days of getting it, I don't think the magistrates will see that very favourably.
There are also worries that increased patrols will send women underground. Some are already inviting punters into their own homes to avoid police.
It's only been the last year or something that it's been constant with police, because there's that many complaints at the minute that everyone's getting arrested.
While the figures show that prostitution's gone up in Doncaster over the last year and that some steps have been taken to tackle the growing problem, many of the women actually working on the streets aren't convinced it'll ever be stopped.
While there's someone willing to pay and while girls are willing to work, it'll always be there. And I mean, girls in a way are providing a service, because there might be a lot more rapes, there might be a lot more. So no, it'll not be stopped at all.
Prostitution Uncovered, a special report by Laura Pennington, Hallam FM.
Oh, an unexpected applause, that's lovely. Thank you. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions they want to ask about it. Now you've heard it, has anybody got any questions or about reporting generally? Yeah?
That's quite an interesting story, quite an emotional story. Do you think you should ever get emotionally involved in a story?
Yes, I do, yeah. A lot of journalists, it depends how you cope, really. When you're doing interviews and you have more experience, you'll realise what works best for you. Some journalists have to completely detach themselves, and that's how they cope with it. For me, I think you're a human, have a human conversation with this person. They're telling you, is that an email that's come through? We'll leave it. They're confiding in you, they're trusting you to tell their story. I think you can't ask the right questions or you can't feel without having some emotion involved in it. So when I was talking to the women, you'll probably heard there was a bit of shock sometimes. I mean, the woman, when I said to her, have you ever been attacked? And she said, I've been kidnapped and raped. I was just thinking, this is just so alien and you can't help but feel something. So yes, I think you should be emotionally involved. Not so much that it clouds your judgment, but just enough so that you can have a human conversation with an ordinary person, just from one person to another. And that's how I think that, for me personally, I can show them the respect and the sensitivity that they deserve, because I think often, and I found this myself as well, as you do the job, it's stories, isn't it? You go from one story to another, they all run into one, and you're just going from one story to the next. But you forget how much of a big deal it is for somebody to talk to you, to talk to a journalist, and to be talking to the thousands of listeners as well that you're broadcasting their story to. It's different for politicians, they have media training, but for the ordinary person who might have an extraordinary story or just an ordinary story, it's not something they're used to. So I think, yes, you should be emotionally invested in as far as you can allow yourself to not cloud your judgment, but just so you can tell the story in the most engaging way possible, I think. Yeah. Yes? So yeah, this was quite a difficult one. So I did a lot of sort of trekking the streets looking for residents, which is fine because they're the ones who kind of wanted to talk about it. They were the easy ones. So the difficult ones were talking to the sex workers themselves and even the support workers. So that was my initial way into the community. I couldn't have just gone on a Friday night and turned up and started talking to the women. They would have just thought I was an idiot and they wouldn't have spoken to me. Well, they might have done, but I don't think they would have done. That wouldn't have been the best way to approach it. So I did it by talking to the support workers, the Amber Project, which you heard in the piece. And at first, even they were unsure about it because they'd never done any interviews themselves. So they were nervous and they weren't particularly keen to be interviewed as well. So it was about working with them and saying, this is something which we should be putting a spotlight on. This is something which people care about and we should be covering. So they took a little bit of convincing and they, in the end, were like, yeah, we're going to be part of this, we're going to work together. And then there was the next hurdle of convincing them to let me go out on a night out with them whilst they were speaking to the women. But because the women, the sex workers, trusted the support workers and I was with them and they introduced me to them, they knew they could trust me as well. They didn't have to. Some of the women didn't want to speak to me, which is fine. Obviously, that's their decision, isn't it? You can't force somebody. I don't think you should ever force somebody to speak like that. But some of the women wanted to because they wanted to be heard. And I remember at the end of the night that I spent there, they all thanked me for being there and thanked me for listening to them because they said nobody had ever asked them about their story. And that's such a horribly sad thing to hear, that they said that nobody had ever cared enough to listen to them before. So yes, it was about gaining their trust, but it was about letting them know that they could trust me and they could trust Hallam FM to do their story justice, to do it properly, to not do it in a sensational way, to not do it in a derogatory way, but to do it in a fair, and hopefully you think that from what you heard, that it was a fair way, that everybody had their say, all the different angles. But it was a question of finding people that they trusted and then working with them for them to trust me as well. So that's kind of how I got into the community there. Yeah.
Hello, you're all right.
Hello.
I was going to say, in commercial radio, how much sort of scope do you think there is for packages like that? Because you don't hear that many of them. Like, certainly not now, maybe 10 years ago you might have heard more. But like, do you think there's more room for packages like that rather than just your standard bulletin every hour? Or
yeah.
It's very commercialised with adverts and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, so by its very nature, commercial radio is about the commercial side of things, so making the station pay, but also making it, they're normally sort of more light-hearted, aren't they? So if you've ever listened to Hallam FM or Radio Air here or Capital or Heart, any of those brands that you listen to, it's about music, it's about being upbeat, it's about, the lifestyle side of things, and there's not always, there isn't always seen to be a place for things like this, but actually it's a really important part of commercial radio, particularly local commercial radio. So Hallam FM and Bauer, we pride ourselves on heritage brands. So Hallam FM is seen as a heritage brand because it's been in Sheffield for quite some time now. It's got an established reputation, and part of that is about being closer to your listeners, about doing things which they don't get on other stations because they're not fully local, or they might be national stations, or for whatever reason. So it's this kind of thing which sets them apart. So yes, it's difficult because there isn't always room. They want the songs, you want music, you want your presenter links, adverts as well, of course, for commercials. So there isn't always seen to be room for this kind of thing. But if you have something which is powerful enough, which will enhance the station in its community, there is room for this. So with this, it was, like I said before, it was a bit of a hard sell trying to get this on air. But it was on air because they saw the value in being a part of our community. And at the moment, I've worked on a different project, which is going out hopefully later this week. So it's another, hopefully, 10-minute piece. So there is scope for this in commercial radio. It's just having the right stories and not doing it all the time for the sake of it, but doing it when there's something which can really enhance the station. I know other commercial brands, for example, Heart has its nightly news, which is just before 7 o'clock hour, I think, and they have 15 minutes where they can do longer pieces as well. On our Hallam 2, the old Magic AM, we have a 5-minute bulletin at 1 o'clock, which means we can do slightly longer things as well. So I think whilst there might have been a pull away from doing longer news pieces before, I think they're kind of coming back around to that a little bit, because commercial radio stations are just simply seeing the value in being a local radio station again, in being at the heart of the community that they're broadcasting to. So yeah, there is more scope at the moment, yeah. Yeah.
After spending so long and being such a part of a big story, what do you do afterwards? Do you just walk away?
Yes, I suppose you do in some ways, because life goes on, your job goes on. There's still, I mean, like I was saying, a lot of this work happened in my spare time as I was still doing the day job as well. I have gone back and I did do sort of follow-up pieces as well. So you do go back and you maintain those, I hate to refer to them as contacts, but they are contacts essentially, aren't they? They're the people you build relationships with. You do have that, but yeah, it's one of those things where once you've done something like this, you kind of lay it to rest a little bit and then you can revisit it later on. So it gives you those opportunities to let that settle, I suppose, and then further down the line revisit. So I think it was about 6 months on after this that I went back again and spoke to the support workers. So you don't completely neglect something, but it's always there as something which you can go back and revisit, because if the listeners were engaged with this and remember it, when you bring it back round again, it'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that was there before. So it's not something which you completely leave behind, but you know, you do kind of, I suppose, journalism by its nature, you roll on to the next news, things are always happening, aren't they? Yep.
Do you think that radio has an advantage over television because you're not getting where sticking cameras in people's faces?
Yeah, well, I suppose in some ways that's a benefit. Yeah, it makes things a bit easier. In other ways, it makes it more difficult to tell a story because you don't have the pictures, and pictures often speak for themselves. I mean, for example, you've seen with the Paris attacks, some of the images are just, you don't need words with them, do you? They speak for themselves. With radio, yeah, it is a challenge, that side of it, but it is also can be easier. I mean, I don't know whether I'd have had the same response if I went with a camera doing that same piece. It would have been quite a different piece, really. So yeah, I think maybe radio does have an advantage because it's a bit easier to convince somebody. Although I have been out voxing before, and with my mic, and people have said, "I'm not going to be on TV, am I?" And I think there's no camera here. I've just got a microphone. It's a lot easier. So yeah, it is actually probably, I think, an advantage over TV in that sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you got any advice on how to get into it?
To get into radio, yeah. Like I said earlier, I think it's just about believing in yourself, because it's a competitive industry. I'm not going to lie about that. Everyone will tell you that this week. Everyone will say journalism itself is competitive, radio is also competitive, but it is about knowing what you're good at and making sure that you can convince editors that you're good at it. So it might be a case of going in and volunteering at radio stations. I know obviously you don't want to volunteer for too long because you want to get paid for it, you deserve to be paid for it, but initially getting that foot in the door, it's about making contacts, it's about getting into newsrooms so they know they can trust you and they know that you can be part of their team, you can fit in quite well, you can be trusted to go and do things. So I guess it's a bit of both. It's about knowing how to sell yourself, and it's about being willing to make the effort to go that extra mile, to go into a newsroom for a day and volunteer, or to go and do some work placements, because that's normally where you'll get the work at the end of it. So if you can build a good relationship, I know, for example, when we've had people on work placements, if we've liked them, if they've been good and their job comes up later on, you want to work with them. You want them in your team. So you hope that they apply for the job. And when they do, you think, yeah, great, we've got somebody really great on our team. But you know their name. You know the editor will know when he sees their CV come in, I know them already. I know that they can do the job. So it's just about getting yourself out there, get your face, get your name out there, and just proving to everybody that you can do it. Because once you've been on a course like this, you can do it. You know, there is always that. I remember when I had first left here, I found it quite difficult because how do you go from being a student to being a journalist? But there's no difference. If you're a journalist, you're a journalist. It's just that you've been studying the skills for the last 3 years before that, or the last year. So yeah, don't be afraid to really put yourself out there and sort of show what you can do. So I hope that's good advice. Does that make sense? Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
Did you feel threatened or scared when you was out covering this story, and do you think it's right to possibly put yourself in danger for the sake of the story?
Oh yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? I didn't, well, yes, it wasn't the best situation to be in, because when I was out with the police, that was different because you were obviously out with the police, so that's fine. But when I was out with the support workers, we had a lot of people sort of throwing eggs and that kind of thing at us, just people in cars, so it didn't feel like the nicest environment to be in. And, one night I experienced that. Those women experience it every night they're out, so I can't really complain about it. But yeah, it did feel daunting, it did feel intimidating. And I guess sometimes maybe I've been a little bit naive, I think, when you go out and cover stories, because you don't tend to think about it. You reflect afterwards, well, maybe this could have happened, but fortunately, touch wood, nothing has happened so far. But I think it's up to you to assess whether you think it's worth doing something. Journalism should be about putting a spotlight on something, bringing something to life for the listeners or for the viewers, for whoever's reading if it's print. It's about doing that. So if the way to do that is to put yourself in a potentially risky situation, I'm not saying you should do it, but you do your own sort of health and safety assessment, I suppose. You think about, is it worth doing this? And what happens if something goes wrong? Is it worth it if something goes wrong? And, probably it might not be, but at the end of the day, you make that decision based on the story, the situation. And for me, I felt it could be risky, but it wasn't that risky. And I thought it was worth it. I did, yeah. So I suppose it's up to the individual, isn't it? You work out whether it's worth it or not. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah?
What sort of audience reaction did you get? And the thing I wanted to ask about was that used more widely across Bauer? Because I know it's Doncaster, but it really stands up, doesn't it? You don't have to be local to appreciate that. Was it used more widely across the group?
No, it wasn't. It was only on Hallam FM. So Hallam FM broadcasts South Yorkshire as a whole. So it was broadcast on Hallam FM. It's online though, so obviously that can be a worldwide audience if they know about it and they find it. In terms of the reaction we had, it was an interesting one. So when I was out on the streets and talking to people about it, they were like, "Oh, this is really great. I'm so glad you're covering this." The people who are living there particularly, and also the sex workers themselves were saying this is great. But in terms of the listeners as well, it was an interesting one because we had a few comments on Twitter about it, and there was one business owner who got in touch and said, I'm really glad you're covering this because my business has suffered because of this. So he was saying, yeah, it's great, but he obviously had an agenda as well, I suppose. He had a reason for it. But that was the reaction that we had. And I suppose it's difficult with radio and TV and things like this because not everybody will respond to it about if they like it. If they don't like it, you're more likely to get something, which is a horrible thing, I think. But with this, it was, in terms of the reaction from listeners, we didn't get any complaints. That's what I'll say about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you hear from any of the women that were in the piece afterwards? Did they hear it?
No, they didn't. So this was the disappointing thing for me was I wanted to for them to know about it. So they knew when it was going out on air, but I don't know if they heard it or not. That's the sad thing because I suppose they have quite chaotic lives, so there's no way of really being able to track them other than through the support workers. So they were aware of it, they could make them aware of it, but I have had no feedback from them, but it would be really nice to hear that, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yep.
How long did it take you to produce?
It took a very long time. It took an awful long time. So, yeah, like I was saying, doing the interviews and going out, that probably took months actually, because I started on it and it was, like I say, it was rumbling on in the background. But then when I found the figures, it had to be a fairly quick turnaround. So I think I spent about a week solid doing, and obviously a few days before that week doing things, but I'd been working on it up until then. So it was a really long project, but it was something which, it was worth it, I think. It was worth all those late nights in the studio on my own, feeling like a bit of a saddo, still at work at 10 o'clock at night. But yeah, it was a long time, but I think like I've said before, if you're going to do something, you do it properly, you do it to the best that you can. Yeah.
Is there any plans to do a follow-up on it? Maybe see in a year's time or 5 years' time what the figures are like?
Yes, yeah, well, I did a bit of research trying to find the figures for the last year, and I have failed miserably so far. So if you get in there before me, I'll be really miffed, any of you. But yes, that's the intention. Eventually there'll be some look back on, I think with something like this, we heard a little bit about the work that was being done. It's always really good to go back to that and say, well, has this worked? Has anything changed since then? If it has, we can put a spotlight on that. If it hasn't, well then, there's a story in that as well. So yes, it's in the pipeline, but not sort of set in stone at the moment.
Did you try and talk to any of the punters, any of the men?
Yeah, so you've picked up on the one thing that I was so disappointed about in myself, because that was...
partner of a woman, so that
yeah.
was really hard to get.
Yes, yeah. It was... I'd set myself the challenge of speaking to everybody involved in the circle of prostitution, I suppose, the people who live there, the women, and I was determined to find a punter. Believe me, I tried to find one. And I failed, and I felt so disappointed because that would have been everything to fit the jigsaw together. I went to the change course, I went on a weekend and sat there waiting for the men to come out, and they'd have spoken to speak to them. No, I wasn't allowed to speak to them, that didn't work out. So I got so close but so far so many times. And the guy that I spoke to, they'd said to me he was a punter, but he wasn't when he got there, or he said he wasn't. So yeah, I tried really hard, and it was one of those things where sometimes you set yourself an ambition and you don't always get there. It's disappointing, it is, but next time I will get that punter. Yeah, next time for the follow-up piece, hopefully. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you know if any of the women had pimps, or if they would have got into trouble if they found out they were speaking to you at all?
There was a mixture of women that I spoke to. So some of them who didn't speak, the support workers said to me they have people who are watching. So I felt quite naive on the night because I was oblivious to quite a lot of what was going on. So they were more aware of the situation than I was. So they knew if there were certain cars that they recognised that work with the women. So there might be the pimp's car or whatever. So there were certain women who wouldn't come near when they saw that I was there, or if they saw the support workers there. They wouldn't go in that area because they are obviously being watched by whoever's working with them or controlling them, I suppose. But for the women that I spoke to, they generally didn't have, other than the drug addiction, which was their motivation for doing it, their pimp, I suppose, their reason for doing it, their drug dealers, they didn't have that. But then in the piece you heard the partner, she goes out there to pay for their drug addictions, both of them. So it's kind of what you imply from it, really. There was a mixture of the women. A lot of them said they did it because they wanted the money for themselves. I don't know how true that is, though.
I was looking at magazine journalism. I'm just wondering if you think the piece would have been had the same impact if it was a written piece rather than an audio piece.
Yeah, it's about how you tell a story, isn't it? That's the art of being a journalist. It's about getting a story and making it work for the medium you're in. Although at the moment, I would say, don't think of yourself as a one-medium journalist. You are a multimedia journalist, is how you should think of yourself. So you could bring a magazine article to life. Obviously, if you're a talented writer, then you can write it in such a way which is really engaging with the different experiences of the women and really put shine a light on it. And then you could also complement it with content online as well. So you could have audio recordings of the women. You could have videos, if you can get videos, that kind of thing. It's about people dip in and out of news as and when they want, how they want. So I go on Twitter for my news. I'll go on links. I choose my own news agenda, I suppose. Everybody does that. So even if it's just magazine, it's thinking of different ways of making it engaging. So it depends how you want to make it work. So you could couple it up with radio type content, but I think it's all in the writing, isn't it? It's about knowing what's going to capture somebody in that first bit, and how do you bring that story to life without the audio, without visuals? How do you describe it for people? Which bits do you pick out? I remember one of the interviews I've done for this have I mentioned about a special I'm doing about homelessness? I can't remember if I mentioned that or not. But I remember doing the interview, and whatever stands out whilst you're doing the interview is the bit that's going to stand out for your audience as well. So I went out with this guy who's a rough sleeper, and he, midway through the interview, as he was taking me around where he sleeps, was telling me that he follows rats. Rats are his company because they show him where food is. They come out of a skip, so he knows there's food in there. And that was the thing I wanted to come back to the office and tell everybody. I was like, crikey, there's this guy, and he eats the same food as rats. Can you believe that in this day and age? And that's the kind of thing that when you do an interview, whether it's radio, whether it's TV, whether it's magazine, if there's something that you want to go and tell people about, that is how you tell the story. So I think you just have to be clever with the way you do it to suit your medium, but it's not just one medium anymore. It's got to be much more than that. Have we run out of questions? No, Mike?
Laura, have you mapped out your career? You know where you're heading?
That's an awful question to ask me, Mike. No, I haven't. I really enjoy being a reporter, which I don't know whether most journalists might not like that side of it because it is quite exhausting, it's quite tiring, but I want to be a reporter for as long as I can be. Now that sounds a little bit depressing, doesn't it, for as long as I can be, but it does take its toll on you because you're out late at night, you've got to have the energy, you've got to have the time to do it. I mean, I don't have a family of my own, so I'm able to go out at any hour of the day, it's fine, but I want to be a reporter for as long as I can be. I don't know whether I want to stay in radio. I think I'd probably like to work in TV, despite the challenges that TV might pose compared to radio, but yeah, reporting is what I love, and that's what I want to do for as long as I can do it. So that's as far as I've mapped out, Mike. That's as far as it's gone. Are we exhausted?
If not, please stand.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.